Hi, I'm Whitney Espick, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, alums and friends. I'm Annalisa Weigel, and as president of the MIT Alumni Association, I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest event in our MIT Alumni Forum series, Solving for a Healthier Planet. You'll note that we had a slide up a little while ago that asked you to share in the chat with our fellow alums what you think is the most pressing challenge regarding climate and sustainability right now. As we kick off the program tonight, I encourage you to continue to share to keep the dialogue going. As you know, the Institute announced last May an energized commitment to meet the accelerating climate crisis with Fast Forward, MIT's climate action plan for the decade. The effort, which builds upon the Institute's landmark 2015 plan, includes a broad array of new initiatives and significant expansions of existing programs to address the needs for new technologies, new policies, and new kinds of outreach to bring the Institute's expertise to bear in making a better and healthier world. The climate action efforts underway radiate beyond Cambridge through the contributions of so many of you, our nearly 143,000 alumni living and working around the globe. In a short while, you will meet 3 such alumni who are meeting the moment by tapping into their MIT DNA and training in their respective roles and organizations. They serve as proof of concept of our community's individual and collective impact on addressing this existential global crisis. I hope you will leave today's forum with that same feeling of enrichment and inspiration that we all experienced back in our days at MIT. And now I am delighted to turn to our moderator for today's discussion, MIT Alumni Association CEO, Whitney Espick. Thank you, Whitney, for all that you do, and especially for convening this important discussion today.
Thank you, Annalisa. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm excited to moderate today's MIT Alumni Forum and so glad to welcome our MIT alumni from around the globe who are joining us today. When we talk about climate action, as Annalisa did, we often think of it in terms of the big stories and scientific reports that for some might make the problem feel abstract, just too large to wrap our minds around. So we thought that we might tackle the topic in a very MIT way tonight by breaking the problem down into its various components so that we can better understand the larger story. Joining us now are 3 alumni whose work in this space speak to the idea that individual contributions can roll up to offer a greater impact. Theirs are stories you might not read about because they are hard at work already thinking and doing. As you find out more about them, please tell us in the chat and each other about you. What are you doing to help the health of our planet? Or what are your concerns? Or what are your friends who have MIT connections working on? We want to know what's on the mind of the network, and that can be a part of our conversation tonight. And now I'm delighted to introduce our 3 panelists. Laksha Jain, SM16, Senior Mechanical Design Engineer at Tesla. Rhonda Jordan Antoine, PhD 13, Senior Energy Specialist at the World Bank. And Telit Segev, 18, MEng 18, Project Engineer at the US Forest Service. You can learn more about our speakers on the MIT Alumni Forum website. Unfortunately, our 4th invited panelist, Ikra Nadeem of McKinsey & Company, was unable to join us this evening. We'll reconnect with her in the future, but our featured alumni are here to offer you a glimpse into their current projects and reflect on the collective work in the world aimed toward climate solutions. I hope that you will participate in the conversation by commenting on their insights and asking them questions. And right here on the live stream page is a dialog box for your input. We have someone watching your comments and questions, and you can also upvote others' comments and questions. To start, we've invited each alum to give us all a short synopsis of their climate-related contributions. This will be fun, so let's start with Telit.
So despite holding 2 engineering degrees from MIT, I don't consider myself so much of an environmental engineer as I do a people engineer. While I occasionally need to do some math or look at a spreadsheet or review a design, most of the work I do is in partnerships, building partnerships, cultivating relationships, and really enhancing trust between stakeholders. And to me, that people engineering is really the key to navigating the environmental problems we face as a society and climate change. I currently work in Anchorage, Alaska, up on the Chugach National Forest. And a huge project of mine is to restore Resurrection Creek, home to one of the first gold rushes in Alaska, out near a town called Hope. So placer mining began at the end of the 1800s on Resurrection Creek and resulted in an absolute moonscape. The historical floodplains and wetlands were eliminated or altered, and mine tailings just lined the bank. The stream went from having its natural curves and sinuosity to being almost a straight shot. Yet this creek, Resurrection Creek, is visited yearly by all 5 Pacific salmon species. And this habitat loss severely impacted their spawning in the stream, where without slower moving ponds and log jams for these salmon to rest in and spawn in, they just zoom right on by. So in 2006, the US Forest Service restored 1.5 miles of Resurrection Creek as part of phase 1 of this restoration. And a decade later, we saw the numbers of adult Chinook salmon increase by 6, while pink and chum populations have increased by over 1,000% as of 2015. And while there might be other variables at play, ultimately we do see increases in salmon spawning and utilization of that restored stretch of Resurrection Creek. So now we're about to start phase 2 of the restoration, which is going to cover about 2.2 miles. And what's really fascinating about phase 2 is that it lies within an active mining claim on the national forest. Hope Mining Company, who are the current owners of the mining claim, who weren't responsible for the historical mining degradation and issues to the Resurrection Creek landscape, Hope Mining Company voluntarily agreed to partner with the US Forest Service to establish this 2-mile restoration corridor. And now we're also working with another mining company, Kinross Gold, who donated the Kickstarter money to fund the project. We're also partnering with Trout Unlimited and the National Forest Foundation, 2 environmental nonprofits, and have secured some funding from the state of Alaska. And what this all means is that now, almost 2 decades after we completed phase 1, because environmental nonprofits, mining companies, and government organizations often on opposing sides of the aisle, because these organizations have all come together, we are going to be breaking ground this summer to launch this 5-year project. And all of this wouldn't have happened without people engineering. It wouldn't have been possible without the years staff spent building trust, the time spent together in and out of the field, on the phone, in meetings, cultivating relationships, without the innovation that went into finding a workable solution for this partnership. And I really think that this is a model for tackling environmental challenges more broadly, bringing businesses, government, nonprofits, and other stakeholders like tribes together to the same table. That's how I think tackling climate change can work at the macro scale. But on the micro scale, I think we all make daily decisions, whether that's throwing trash on the floor or not calling out the stranger we saw throw trash on the floor, whether we shower extra long or whether we have friends and family who are in the shower forever. We and all of the people around us all have habits that we can improve on their sustainability. And at the micro level, I think the power of people engineering, of relationships, is just as important as people listen to those they trust and care about. And I know we all don't work in the environmental space, but we all impact our environment. And we can all be people engineers. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn the table around and ask you a question. I imagine you're here because you care about the environment, and I'm sure you're already thinking about what change you can make personally to improve the planet. And I would love to know what you're thinking about. So with that in mind, please put in the chat, what environmental change or habit are you thinking you might be willing to commit to, either yourself or through a conversation with someone in your life? How are you going to be a people engineer for a healthier planet? Really excited to read what you all put in the chat.
Tell it while people are typing. That was a great story. I love your thought about people engineering and your optimism that a model for tackling climate change might involve public-private partnerships. And I'll get back to those as questions later if needed. But I wanted to let the group know that our audience listening, some concerns that were floating in their mind before you all started talking. We need to get going on infrastructure change. There's no time to lose on that is a big concern. And then also just the general sense that we're consuming more resources than the world can, that the earth can, respond to, recover from, account for. So just to give a little bit of context for the mindset of our excellent audience. And it does look like we have a little bit of comment from our crowd to tell its question. The world CO2 emissions is 4 million tons per hour. How do we solve this crisis? Someone would like maybe some advice from you on an action they could take in their own lives. Or what have I done versus climate change that many people can do? By eliminating food waste for an international company, 400 million pounds of CO2 equivalents can be eliminated, and waste elimination is basic in all industries. So sounds like this person is saying we all have cleanup we can do within our companies and how we run our processes. Here's a suggestion: volunteer for the U.S. Park Service. Absolutely. Flying less, buying less, participating in publiclab.org. I'm not familiar with that organization, but we'll look it up. So there were some thoughts that people had. And I'll offer, when I go home, I'll suggest shorter showers. I know my two kids have a sibling rivalry about who's in the bathroom too long, and that will make for a very peaceful evening for me when I bring that up. But what does this spark for you when people come up with these possibilities for what they might do?
I mean, I think it inspires hope, both that we clearly have MIT alums who are, more knowledgeable and have more stats on this than I do, but also, excitement that people are willing to reflect on their personal and individual life and habits and, make change there too. So yeah, thanks for sharing all of those comments.
That's great. All right, well, we'll get back to more Q&A later in our time together, but let's now shift to Lakshya so that he can share his climate action story and we can learn about, or his interest in climate control. And take it away, Lakshya. Tell us about your work with Tesla and your interest in what goes on there.
Yes. So before I had words, I loved cars. My mother tells me that I wouldn't identify colors unless they were on cars. So if there was a red block or a purple block, I wouldn't call them out, but I would call out a red car or a purple car. So as I was growing up in school, I learned about environmental pollution and climate change and how we must reduce, reuse, and recycle in that order to play our part in helping solve this issue. That made me always try to think of ways to reduce energy consumption. And sometimes it would be in ways that couldn't work because I didn't know the laws of thermodynamics at the time. But eventually I did learn about them and learn about the efficiencies of different mechanical systems. And being a bit of a perfectionist, it became my passion to try to optimize things for maximum efficiency. Naturally, that brought me to MIT to try to learn about this the best I could. I worked on the Hyperloop student team, and I worked with combustion engines for vehicles. And in this, I became aware of EVs and Tesla and how that is the next big revolution in transportation. So I applied to Tesla through many avenues, and I didn't hear back for a while until I took a vacation. And within the first hour of landing, I got an email from Tesla. I was so excited, I forgot about the vacation, and I took the first available opportunity to interview, which was the next day. And so my first couple of Tesla interviews were from the visitor center of the Grand Canyon and the Yosemite National Parks, because those were the only places there which had good connectivity. So this brought me to Tesla 5 years ago. In that time, I've been part of exciting projects. Okay, so in one of those projects was when I had worked with the team in 2019 throughout a long weekend and over the night, around the clock, to make these prototype cars, which were able to set the fastest EV sedan lap times at the Nürburgring circuit. And then over the next couple of years, working to make it a production reality with the Model S Plaid. I also worked with the team when our production level wasn't enough to meet the demand and to keep the company going. I worked through 2 weeks to build an extra assembly line, which was underneath what you could technically call a tent. And we literally use nuts and bolts to put up the power tracks and train the people to help keep this going. I am part of the electrical team, and every day I try to think of ways to reduce the weight of the electronic systems and reduce the complexity. So here's an example. This is a system in which the central computer is connected to the end devices in the car through a complex web of wired connections and through more controllers than are needed. And the devices can be, say, an airbag or a screen or a sensor. And this is the result of design based on supplier-defined requirements and legacy devices which were designed in isolation. So we strive to work to create a simpler system where lesser material is used, which makes the system and the car more efficient, because lesser batteries can be used for lower weight to get the same range. And when these connections aren't available, we design the cable and the connector to make this possible. So 5 years ago, EVs were considered to be too slow to charge, too expensive, and only about 0.5% of the global vehicle sales were EVs. Today, this has risen to about 6.5%, but in the next 5 years, I believe EVs are going to be so good that it is going to be the default choice for everyone buying a car, and combustion engine vehicles will be the exotic choice. And this will go a long way towards moving the entire globe towards sustainability. I know my next car purchase will be an EV. And that's why I hope to work to create more options available for customers, and also to provide more colors than Tesla does. So, okay, I want to ask you this now. how likely is it that your next your next car purchase will be an EV on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is absolutely not going to happen, and 5 is yes, that is what it's going to be.
Thank you, Laksha. I love your story of doing your Tesla interviews in the National Park Service or the Grand Canyon Visitor Center. I hope someone took a picture of you or you took a selfie of yourself doing that, because that's a story for the ages. That's great. Well, let's see. We'll see if our folks type in, but I will let you know that I'm definitely a yes for EV as my next car for sure. They, you see them everywhere. And I think part of, you can comment on this, but part of what you're working on is making it easy to choose the, I'll call it the green choice, the energy efficient choice, because you love the thing you're getting so much. It's so beautiful, or it's so fun, or it's so aesthetically pleasing, or it's so compelling from an engineering perspective that you forget that you might pay a little bit extra, or that you might need to learn some new habits about charging your car, or whatever it might be. Let's see. We do have some messages from our engaged MIT alumni. And so from the audience, I'm hearing, my brother's first word was car. He is also an engineer. So that's a common story among our community. That's wonderful. And to save our planet, we are driving an electric vehicle and eating a more vegetarian and vegan diet. So it's a good reminder that it's not just one thing, that we can each sort of learn to juggle slowly. First one ball, then another, then a third. Someone says if the price comes down, yes. So that's your job to work on that, Laksha. I guess that second assembly line might have helped with that some. And then someone says, I already own one. So there you go. And someone else says, I already have a Tesla. I need a hybrid for my second car for cold weather. Tell me a little bit about that, Laksha. Why would that person have said that?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, love to hear the comments about the first word being the car, and already having a Tesla or looking for one. Yes. So in cold weather, because you don't get heat directly from an engine like in a combustion car, electric vehicles have to work harder and spend more of their stored energy to provide heating. But definitely, we are also working to make that better. And provide step changes, but also gradual improvements, such that you won't feel like in cold weather you can't own an EV and need a hybrid car. For example, we had the heat pump introduced recently, so that helps.
That's great. Thanks for those insights. So someone else says, I want a Tesla, please. We aren't having a drawing at the end of this program. So if that was your impression, you need to find another path to a Tesla. I love the idea of EV, and my next car will be EV, though my biggest dilemma is discarding a perfectly functioning high efficiency car that will end up in a landfill and replace it with the EV. Right, there is this sort of chain reaction of decisions we all have to sort through, but I bet there are ways to maybe recycle that further, or donate it into the community. I'm sure as an MIT person, you have lots of thoughts about how you might move that through the system in a smart way. All right, let's see. We're having great conversation, so I need to stop with this part about Tesla and move us to Rhonda so that we get to hear her story and then have time for some questions at the end. So thank you, Laksha. And Rhonda, I'm going to pass it to you. We're eager to hear all about you and your work.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'd like to shift gears a little bit. And I work in Sierra Leone, which has a population of about 8 million. So I wanted to ask you, what fraction of the population in Sierra Leone do you think has electricity? Enter it into the chat. I'll wait about 15 seconds just to see what your guesses are. Hope you're entering them. Okay. Maybe you all are being a little bit shy.
Here we
Okay.
go. Someone says 45.
45, 40,
I'm guessing 5. Let's see what else we hear. 10,
10. Okay. All right.
higher, 75, 50. You can see these? Okay, 75, 50.
Yes, I can see them.
Good.
Yes. Okay, so let me jump in. The correct answer is that about 25% of the population in Sierra Leone has access to electricity, but it's not always 24/7 power, making it quite difficult for businesses and other service providers like healthcare service providers or the schools to support the population. And so now I want you to think about those that are living in the dark. That means no lights, no computer, no refrigerator, no cooling nor heating, no irrigation for agricultural production, no manufacturing. That's 75% of the population. 75% of the population is living in the dark. And that's just in Sierra Leone. Worldwide, about 760 million people don't have access to power. And 600 million of those people live in sub-Saharan Africa, where I work. So my job at the World Bank is to help governments in developing countries design projects that will essentially connect more people to power and do it sustainably. So we do this in 2 ways. We offer support to grid-based services, and we also offer support to off-grid services. Let me start with the grid-based services. So we use our understanding of large-scale solar, wind, hydro, and battery technologies, and we develop optimization tools that tell us when new power plants must come online and what new transmission lines must be built to meet the electricity demand of people living near the centralized grid. Now, we also work with utilities to ensure that power is provided reliably. We want to ensure that their performance meets certain standards so that they're not frequent blackouts, and that you have more than 3 or 4 hours of power a day. We also need to ensure that these electric utilities are financially viable. If not, we help them identify the reforms required to improve their performance so that they can become sustainable electricity service companies. So this involves helping these companies improve their management practices and address issues of corporate governance, which is a huge deal in these countries. We help them integrate software and technologies to make them more efficient at doing their day-to-day activities, such as metering power consumption, billing and collections, tracking customers, solving power outages and whatnot. And we also provide funding to invest in new and improved infrastructure. So expanding the centralized grid, it can be quite expensive and it takes time to develop. We're talking years and years. And funds are typically very constrained in the countries in which we work. So the question becomes, how can you support economic development without access to the central grid? And how can these countries meet their demand for electricity in a clean and climate-friendly way? After all, many other countries before them have relied on fossil fuel-based power to develop their economies. Well, at the bank, we work with the governments to determine what off-grid electricity solutions can be used to reach even the most remote households and the most remote businesses in any given country. We use state-of-the-art data technology, machine learning, and again, optimization to determine where a standalone solar system or mini grids that are based on PV and battery storage, small hydro, and even wind, we identify where these technologies are most suitable. And we answer a number of questions along the way. We need to address, where are people located in the country? These are vast countries. Where are the people actually living? We use the building footprint data that's available on Google or by Maxar. We also need to figure out who already has electricity and who doesn't. And it's not always possible to go and visit every village in a country. So we use nighttime satellite imagery and field data to know where the grid exists and where people have power. Now, what is the demand for power? We use the locations of schools, health facilities, businesses, crop types and industries, if they exist, to estimate how much power is needed. And we leverage information on the potential for wind, solar, and hydro to go into a location-based algorithm that identifies the cheapest technology solution to meet demand at each location in any given country. So I learned about clean energy technologies and some of these optimization algorithms right here at MIT. But as you can imagine, these challenges are never about technology alone. They're about human behavior, incentives, policies, regulations, the ability to pay, and business models that get the right technology into the right places. So for example, many customers are poor in the countries in which I work. And so there must be financing for them to buy a solar system. On the same token, private companies must be willing to set up supply chains in these remote locations and also ensure that systems are maintained over time. So that's what we do. We look at both grid-based support and then off-grid electricity services. And the impact so far has been positive. It's difficult to capture the impact, and it's difficult to even imagine what this means. But let me show you Kenya. I think you can see it on the screen. So in Kenya, I helped design energy access programs and develop the national electrification strategy there. So these images from 2012 and 2017, they were developed by Brian Min and his team at the University of Michigan to help monitor progress. And here you can visually see the difference in light output at night after only a few years of program implementation. What you see is electricity access increasing from 38% in Kenya to 50%, 56% in fact. And I hope that you can see that the light output nearly doubled. So going back to the figures that I started with at the beginning of my talk, there are 760 million people around the world that live in the dark. They need power so that they have access to basic services and so that their economies can grow and develop. Now, this is a huge challenge. It's a huge energy access challenge, but with climate-friendly solutions and the right diversity in thinking and right diversity in minds, the opportunity for development is greater. Back to you, Whitney.
Rhonda, thank you for taking us on a journey to Africa with the nighttime sky and bringing us back to talk about technology. And remember that in the case of each one of you, it's about a technology-human interaction. And with Telit and the Alaska Nature Site, not so much, I suppose, the technology, but the technology partners, the different partners in business and industry with Laksha, the humans and their machine, but also, you're doing work, Laksha, to take things to scale and spread it around the globe. And so it will have, broad human impact. And then Rhonda, obviously, giving access to electricity, which feels so fundamental to those of us living here in the United States, is, I would assume, a life-changing thing to bring to small communities, medium-sized communities across more or less supplied areas. Just really inspiring stories. And I love thinking about how each of you have followed your own path to arrive at these important, meaningful projects to dive into. I'm hearing that there are a lot of questions coming through, and they will come into me as we chat. But I wanted to ask Telit a little bit about, and it can apply to all three of you. You talked about the industry, public-private partnerships, the different partners involved in making the restoration possible. And part of the dialogue around action on climate action is that you can't possibly be doing the right thing if you're partnering with industry. And, we hear about that at MIT and many of the partnerships that we have to just explore things further, understand materials better. But it sounds like you see a little bit more space in that for public-private partnerships, done responsibly. I wondered if you just wanted to comment on that a little bit, tell it, or if others have thoughts on that as a tool in driving change that we all need so badly.
Yeah, I mean, I think people in the chat were really getting at the scale of the issue. And I think to address any issue that's so global and so difficult to tackle, I really do think we need an all hands on deck approach. And I think as part of that, you know, we as users have a responsibility to think about our habits. I think us as part of our professions and our career choices have a responsibility to think about the social impact we're having through our careers, or how can we make our place of work more green. And then I think we need to be thinking kind of at a broader policy, at a broader partnership scale. How can we bring different organizations who have been on different sides of the table, who are in different industries, to really tackle such a global issue?
Wise insights. Rhonda, I would guess that you have a view on this as well from your World Bank seat.
Definitely. I think every single project that I've been working on in the area of energy access is really a public-private partnership, because I think investing in development and the provision of basic services, you know, many argue that that's the responsibility of the government. That's the responsibility of governments. But at the same time, the governments don't necessarily have the capacity to, by themselves, deliver the solutions that are required. And so then you leverage the innovation that's coming out of the private sector. You leverage the new business models that they're proposing that help get those technology solutions to the end customers and my situation. And so there's always a public-private partnership that I'm working on for every single project.
That's great. It gives us a lot to reflect on. I'm going to shift questions a little bit. So someone from the classes of the 90s says, I'm curious what our speakers find are the biggest challenges to climate morale and how to address them. And you're free to define climate morale however you'd like, whether it's the energy to keep trying, or the people who doom scroll and can't even move because they're, you know, frozen by what the bad news might be that day. Laksha, maybe I'll start with you, because, you know, Tesla is as a company, as a product, is complex, but it's given people a path of delight to participate in climate action. And I wonder if, in your experience within the company, if there's conversation about Tesla's role in people moving in a greener direction, a more efficient direction, for broader reasons in addition to just the glory of the science, which is incredible. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you feel that Tesla gives people hope against low morale for climate. Recently, just 2 days back in the Super Bowl, we had loads of EV advertisements. So yeah, I think in almost every aspect, we hear bad news a lot, and it's amplified. And if we focus on the good things, especially that come out of, going back to the last question, it could come from the industry or from research in universities. It can definitely give everyone the feeling that they can participate in it more, and to just try to remember, like Talat said, that we can, even if we're not all working on directly solving climate issues, we can still participate in that by doing our playing our part in that.
Very nice. Good. Thank you. Tell it, we'll let you go next. And then Rhonda, what do you think about, we'll just talk about maybe the United States culture right now, but maybe others you can comment on elsewhere. What is the morale? Do you feel that there's energy heading in the right direction? Do we need more? Do we have enough? What do you think?
I always think we need more. I do think there are challenges with morale, whether that's news overload, whether that's doom and gloom vibes. But I really, at least for myself, the way I try to think about it is, when I was graduating from MIT and trying to figure out my career, where I want to be in 50 years from now, I had no clue. And it was just kind of applying to one job at a time, one interview at a time, one resume submission at a time. And I think there absolutely needs to be a lot more strategy probably to climate change and how I approached applying to jobs. But I really think going through this step by step and knowing that we are making progress and we are going to continue to make progress, I think that's a really important thing to focus on, the positive side of things, not just the negative side of things, to keep up hope.
Great, thank you. We do have a lot of questions flowing through. So Rhonda, I'm not going to ask you to talk about morale. I'm going to shift questions for you. So Kenya sounds like a smaller scale of India and China, both of which are using coal-fueled power. I don't expect either to reduce their use of fossil fuels in the coming decades. India has huge coal reserves and it's for energy. Its uses for energy will only increase. What are your thoughts about what you're able to do in Africa and where it might be transferable and where we might need to think of a different plan?
Yeah, I mean, that's great insight offered by the participant, and I essentially agree with what they said. Those are the trends, so I would agree with that. I think that Africa, it really doesn't contribute largely to global emissions. However, there is an opportunity to not increase their emissions. And one thing is true, which is that the renewable resource potential in Africa is very tremendous. So there's extensive hydro that's available. Now, we all know that there are safeguards concerns when it comes to large scale hydro. However, many years, decades upon decades of experience has taught us really important lessons so that we can mitigate those risks of large hydro. But there's also solar, obviously, very, very high solar irradiation. In some parts of the continent, there's wind potential. And so I think that, regional integration, it is not a renewable technology in itself, but it's essentially, building transmission lines that cross country boundaries so that, a country that has, let's say, fewer resources can tap into the abundant resources of its neighbor, for example. So altogether, as far as I understand it, there's enough renewable energy potential to support electricity demand and electricity demand growth in the coming couple of decades. And so there's an opportunity to tap into that and not actually contribute to global emissions at the same time. Yeah.
Great answer, thank you. Let's see, going over to Telit, someone wants to know, is Alaska going to require current mine companies to fully reclaim their mines to the quality you're talking about? Is this a trend or is this a special circumstance? Maybe one way to think about that question.
So I want to highlight that this was a partnership. We don't really have record or tracks of the responsibility of the historical mining, but I will say our regulations now require what is called remediation, where if a miner is going in to do extraction, they're supposed to restore the landscape after that. So I think that's just another example of hope and improvement as a society where we have better regulations in place to do restoration and rehabilitation after mining projects happen. But I think this is a really exciting example in that It's two mining companies who weren't a part of those historic mining activities coming to the table to do this restoration project.
Wow, that's just really fantastic. I have to imagine there were some pretty special humans on the ground who brought those initial conversations together and started this whole thing. All right, we're going to shift over to Laksha. Practical question, will the grid as we currently know it be able to handle 60% electric adoption by automobile drivers in the United States? That's a prediction. We're not asking you to go on the record for Tesla, just to help you feel comfortable with that question. Shake your crazy 8-ball and let us know what you think.
Yes. Well, the grid as we know it may not be able, because we've seen recently grid outages in different parts of the US anyway, with different weather conditions.
Mhm.
But one of the ways it could be overcome is having solar panels in many houses, so that instead of a very connected system, each house can supply its own electric vehicle need with solar panels in the house. So of course it doesn't work everywhere, but it goes some way towards helping that. And hopefully we get more renewable energy resources other than even just solar. And then storage batteries to help store all that renewable energy from the sun and other sources to charge vehicles primarily at night. So I think the situation is evolving, and as people start to buy more and more cars, the industry will just be forced. People, like, it'll see a more lucrative source to sell electricity, and it'll just happen.
The market will have to respond to the market forces of the electrical adoption. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. All right. We have this question that, let's see who would like to take a stab at it. We need more involvement by state governments in the United States. Is California the best good model? Is there anyone here who feels like they've looked across and has a comment or has a thought on how we might, I think the question is, how can we move at scale, either at state level or nationally? I think Rhonda might take a stab at it.
Actually, I was just gonna say I wouldn't venture out to comment on it. I haven't studied the California model enough to be able to comment. Yeah.
Wise. All right. Well, here's one for you. Is the World Bank helping Northern Africa with mega solar power projects for electricity use domestically and for export of electricity to other Mediterranean European countries? That could be a very significant offset to Middle East fossil fuel exports, is the idea.
I think that's a great idea. And I don't specifically work on North Africa, so I'm not positive about the portfolio there. However, I must say back in 2015 or 2016, I actually did some modeling for a Northern African country to develop some transmission lines that would in fact be exporting power. So in terms of whether or not that turned into a project, I can't say for certain, but I have actually done some analysis on that. And I actually agree that that would be, that's an opportunity to look into. So I'll have to check the portfolio there to know what projects are actually going on. Yeah.
Great. I'm glad you had a connection to that question. Let's see. Talit, would you talk a little bit more about this people engineering? We're talking right now about a lot of technologies, many of them worked on at MIT and other research universities and large companies in the United States. And many options for technology and for different behavior are available. And the nut to crack seems to be adoption, consistency, belief to move in a direction. And I'm not asking you, Talit, about what a plan would be for several billion people to get their act together, but in your experience, working on the ground in Alaska, I think I heard you say the word trust. I'm just interested in what you would say the key components to, getting people around a table and to adopt a new set of behaviors or a new course of action that is really, in large part, altruistic, or has altruistic outcomes, maybe as a nice byproduct.
Yeah, I do think trust and relationship building is a huge component of it. But I think for me personally, getting to the place where I had the skill sets to really build that trust and grow partnerships, I think it really did go back to my time at MIT and some of those communication classes, some of those hands-on project classes, senior thesis, where I was partnering with a tribal government to, through a citizen science project to look at their water quality. And so I think for me, people engineering also goes back to that education component, and how are we training our engineers or future engineers to have that skill set to be able to really toe that line of innovating and spreading that innovation and adaptation. I also wanted to have a real quick go back on my answer to the last question. I'm not a mining expert, and I will say there are some mining projects that might leave irreversible impact. And so in those cases, I do know other mitigation opportunities I believe need to be explored. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks for both of those answers. Rhonda, and then I'll get to Laksha. Rhonda, so tell me about your thoughts on how do you get you also work in partnerships, and what is the secret from your perspective to building strong partnerships, to making people take action that might not be obviously in their immediate best interest, but perhaps have long-term implications?
I think just to piggyback on what was said before, definitely developing trust is just a key ingredient of any relationship. But I think kind of hooking people is all about, how can I put it, demonstrating to them how these newer behaviors are beneficial to them and somehow making that tangible today. Mm-hmm. And one thing I wanted to, although I wasn't asked the question earlier, I did want to comment that this morale, mm-hmm. Making positive climate action kind of new way of life, I think we have to make it sexy. We have to have, communication campaigns. For every single energy access project that I work on in Africa, there is a community sensitization campaign. There's community awareness development. There's community awareness building. And essentially, there are teams that go around and explain to communities what's being done, what technology is being deployed, and how is it going to help them. And in fact, in some of the projects, we invest a little bit in, let's say, if a technology is going to help someone develop a new business in a remote area, we give them some seed funding for that new business. So how can you make climate action sexy? And I think that we know how to do it. I think that there are solutions out there, but there has to be a willingness somewhere. Now, I don't know where it should start. And that goes back to the question of one of the participants saying, is either California a good model, or should it happen at the state level? Or, I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that we know how to make positive climate action sexy, and we're not doing it yet. So I'll stop there.
I love that. That's great. And that gives a place for the communicators and the English majors in the world to help out with many of these problems that need technical solutions as well. So it's a team effort. That's great. All right, Laksha, a question about hope for you. So large scale, 100 megawatt or more storage battery power is critical for the 3 times or 4 times of solar and wind use by electric utilities. How far away do you think we are from that R&D based on what you're seeing in battery technology and the pieces that you're working on?
Honestly, I'm not very well aware of the energy storage, uh, of the energy storage applications and their scaling. But I know that in Tesla, the energy storage deployments it started off from a very small footprint, and it has grown manyfold over the last few years. And the rate of targeted expansion was even faster, like more than exponential. So
that's good news. If that's the direction we need to head in, it sounds to me. I know there's research going on at MIT in those areas as well, and I'm sure at places like Caltech and Stanford and others. And
yes,
maybe there's opportunity for partnership, who knows?
Yes, and the research also includes how to decrease the minerals which are more difficult to find, like cobalt. So I think it's headed in the right direction.
That's great. Well, we're at 7:58, and I have to say that each one of you have contributed some spark of your own self, of your own commitment to what you're working on, and some insights into your interactions with positive climate action that have inspired me and remind me why this community of over 140,000 like-minded MIT people around the world are really just so special. You're trained in certain ways, your minds work in like steel traps, and you're very caring and concerned people who will take the time to understand not only how the technology works, but what the impacts are, who take the time to understand the interrelatedness of nature and humanity, the importance of bringing technology that's available to the Western world, to the rest of the world, and making sure that everyone has as much access as they can to what makes life something that is engaging and valuable and even delightful and fun sometimes. So thank you all tremendously. Let me say a few words in closing to our audience, and I appreciate your time and your many good comments and questions as well, viewers this evening. We are out of time, and so thank you for joining us. If you've joined us live today, you'll find more talks on this subject throughout the week. A variety of groups at MIT certainly are working on these kinds of efforts. We'd love to have you join us at some of those events too. We've also recorded this broadcast, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel within a week. We want your feedback about today's event, so please send it to alumniforum@mit.edu, and we'll be back with another MIT Alumni Forum next month. Finally, I want to thank Alumni Association President Annalisa Weigel for joining us tonight, as well as our panelists for their time and tremendously inspiring stories. Laksha Jain, Rhonda Jordan-Antoine, and Telit Segev, thank you so much for all of the ways in which your efforts are making a better world. And with that, I'll say good night to you all, and thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.